This is called The Thing About Joanne. And yeah, it's one of those Utah Donkey Kong pieces. Joanne Sorensen had one of those faces, broad with an aquiline nose, evenly spaced green eyes, perhaps a size too big, and therefore all the more expressive, shining always like an alley cat's and reflecting in their liquidity and earnestness that betrayed her best efforts to feign ennui. They were windows into her well-oiled cogworks, which moved more efficiently than was fashionable at the time. She had fair hair and fair skin that burned easily if she spent too much time outside, a lesson she had to learn again each spring when she took with too much zeal to outdoor tennis at her parents' private club, 2 clay courts overlooking the Wasatch Bench, and felt a tingle in her chest after being homebound for so many months, the fulgent snow still melting in mottled patches, reflecting the midday rays so intensely back into her face that after an afternoon of matches, which she rarely lost, she woke up the next day sore and red as a Maine lobster. She possessed what she herself would admit was a girl next door kind of quality, which led many men to fantasize about bringing her home to meet their mothers. Though few men ever had the courage to approach her, most had to make do with a look. Those who did usually mistook her for someone else. That was the thing about Joanne. She was too used to being accosted by strangers, absolute nobodies who wanted to know how they knew her. She had that kind of face. A blank visage which invited frequent comparison to others, to cause men to inexplicably attach some kind of meaning to her based solely on the way she made them feel. Haven't I seen you someplace before, they'd ask, or I never forget a face, but they did because they didn't know her. They could be relentless sometimes, rude in their pursuit of some kind of connection, almost always non-existent. When she lived in Los Angeles, taking classes at UCLA, people often assumed she was an actress. Not a famous one, perhaps, but a supporting player, one who had been unfairly consigned to play bit parts in the backgrounds of the commercials that had ceaselessly washed over their imaginations, advertising wares that might mitigate every unfortunate tick or wrinkle of their otherwise upright selves, making everything downy soft and ivory clean. She was just like that word, just out of conscious reach, the one that irritates like an itch that can't be scratched every compulsive player of the New York Times crossword puzzle, and the longer it evades them, the more bothersome it becomes until, at last, it arrives in a frisson of recognizance, giving credence to the idea that there are no memories lost, that everything we do exists somewhere if only we were more adept at accessing it. Except they were wrong, more often than not, to think they knew her. No one ever did. No one knew the real Joanne. At once, at a ball game, she was accosted by a man who couldn't bring to mind the exact circumstances of their past acquaintance. His opening gambit, typical of many she politely suffered throughout the years, went like this: "Hey, don't I know you?" At first, she used to think this was a weak attempt at a pickup line, but then, through repeated plays, she realized the men who approached her were sincere, at least for the most part, desperate and fumbling and genuinely troubled at their inability to place her. "What's your name, sweet cheeks? Where did you go to school? Where do you work? Where do you live?" With every question and answer, the one lobbying queries would naturally become more peevish as his frustration mounted. His failure to contextualize her grew like a painful boil that eventually found its release in a different line of attack altogether, far more specific and personal. "Did you ever date Bob? Did you have an internship at Guay? Do you know a woman named Susan Templeton?" That one always got her. Susan Templeton. Always a name so odd and specific, its very mention seemed to evoke a past she'd never actually experienced or could imagine. It was enough to cause both inquisitor and subject to pause for a moment to assess its possibilities. Like the appearance of an unexpected bit of coriander in a soup, it was so evocative it had to be mulled over, carefully weighed, before finally being negated. Eventually the questioner grew weary and walked away, usually in a huff, convinced Joanne was holding out on him, not being truthful or forthright, purposely evading the connection, which undoubtedly led some of her more inquisitive harassers toward a more creative and unholy line of speculation. They were all envious of her, after all, and reaching, desirous of any kind of correlation, kind of connection? Was she perhaps a part of some kind of witness protection program, or a porn star, say, or a kept woman, some kind of princess? She was, in fact, none of these things. She just had one of those faces.